All right, gang, we are going to work on lesson 1.4b, measure and classify angles. We talked about angles yesterday in class, and now we're going to just kind of put it all down in our notes so that we have something we can refer to. Our goal for the lesson today is to name and classify angles and to find angle measures. So those are the two things that we want to make sure that we are able to do today. So let's get right into our new vocabulary. The first thing that we have here is an angle, and we want to specifically talk about how to name it. So what is an angle? An angle is a shape that is made from two rays. Remember, a ray is something that starts and goes on with a common endpoint. Now, I have two different examples of angles right here. So in the first example, the angle here on the left, notice that I have an endpoint right here of B, and my two rays point out from that. This endpoint right here, that is what we call the vertex. And then the two rays, those are the two sides of the angle. And then this part right here in the middle, that is the interior of the angle. So when we want to name this angle, we are going to call this angle angle B. We have one angle there. It's very clear. Angle B is just that one angle. Or we can call it angle ABC or angle CBA. What I want you to notice is that whatever the vertex is the middle letter when you name it. The vertex is the most important part in naming your angle. If you look over at this angle on the right, you notice here that we have something on the interior of the angle. We have an extra ray here. So do you see this guy that goes through the middle? When you have something like that, then you have multiple angles in that at that vertex, and that's what causes a little bit of problem. So if you look at that, how many angles do you see? Most people see the two main angles, but the whole angle altogether, that's a little bit trickier. So for this question, if we were to name it angle X, that would be wrong. There is too much stuff going on for you to name that angle X. You need to be able to name them individually. So angle 1 would be the top angle, and we would call that triangle WXY. Or you could call it angle YXW. If you wanted to name angle 2, the one on the bottom, you would call that angle YXZ or angle ZXY. And then if you wanted to name the whole angle, all of it, angle 3, you could call that angle WXZ or angle ZXW. The one thing that I want you to notice on all of these angles is that the X is the middle letter in every single answer. The vertex is always going to be your middle letter. So make a note of that somewhere. That right there, I would say, is a pretty important thing, something worth paying attention to. it causes problems a lot of times. Now let's move down and talk about classifying angles. Give me a sec. All right. When we classify angles, and you talked about this yesterday, there are four classifications that we use. Most of these are things that you've seen before, so let's go over them. The acute angle is an angle that is less than 90 degrees. So we would say less than 90 degrees. That's the definition. An obtuse angle is an angle that is more than 90 degrees, the way people get it usually, but technically it is something that is actually between 90 and 180 degrees. But generally we think of it as something that's more than 90. So the obtuse angle, that's the big angle. And the acute angle is the small angle, when you think about those two right there. Then the next two that we have are the right angle and the straight angle. The right angle is this guy right here. It is always equal to 90 degrees, no matter what. The straight angle is always equal to 180 degrees. The straight angle is this guy right here. It's 180 degrees on the top and 180 degrees on the bottom. When you draw the straight angle, don't forget you should include a vertex. You have to have that vertex point on there to make it a complete straight angle. All right. Let's pause this guy right here and jump to page 2 and talk about angle addition. Angle addition is just like segment addition, except in this case we will be adding angles. It is part plus part equal to the whole. So remember that diagram that we had on the front page where we had the two angles and then we had the third angle right there? Angle addition would be taking the measure of angle 1 plus the measure of angle 2 and equaling to the measure of angle 3. This little m is a way for us to show that we are talking about a measure. That is a degree. That is just a notation. That means that we are putting in a degree right there. So again, the measure of angle 1 plus the measure of angle 2 equals the measure of angle 3. This angle addition is for sure something that you want to make sure that you know for the test. We have some practice problems. You can try them now, or I can explain them to you in the practice video. Let's right now pause and give me a chance to get to page 3. We have one more set of vocabulary to talk about. The last thing that we're going to talk about here are congruent angles and angle bisectors. We have already used the word congruent, so it is exactly what it looks like. Congruent angles are two angles with the same degrees or measure. Now you have a diagram on your paper right there. So I have two angles. In this case I can call them angle E and angle Q because there is just one angle in each picture. And I can take my smartboard, trace angle E, And if I move it over, I can see that it is the exact same as angle Q. They both have arrows on them. They both go on forever and ever. What's important is what's happening at the vertex. I can say that angle E is congruent to angle Q. Those two angles are exactly the same. That also tells me that the measure of angle E is equal to the measure of angle Q. Notice when we use measure, we have equal in the middle, and when we use congruent, we just talk about the pictures themselves. All right? Then let's move on to our angle bisector. We've talked about bisecting a couple times now. A bisector, remember, is just the part that goes through the middle. So an angle bisector cuts an angle into two equal parts. It kind of goes through the midpoint, although an angle doesn't really have a midpoint. Point is just a spot, and an angle has a bisector, but basically it's the same idea. If I look here and you notice that I have these angles marked the same. Do you see this little arc right here and this little arc right here? That's like your tick marks. They're telling you, for example, that those two angles have the same measure. This guy right here is the bisector. So in this picture, I know that the measure of angle WXY is equal to the measure of angle YXZ. WXY is this guy on top. YXZ is this guy on bottom. They are equal to each other. Angle bisector. Now what I want you to do is pause your video. Try those practice problems if you haven't tried them yet. If you need help, pick me up in the next video, or you can get started on your homework.